Brilliant. Good stuff. And we are live, Guy. Thank you very much for joining everyone on what we hope will be a very interesting discussion today about generative AI and what it means for the current and the future of search. So, quick introduction. My name's Josh. I'm the customer success team lead within the US for Athena. I've been with Athena for around about 3 years, previously working in the agency space as well. And as you can see, very, very happy to introduce Guy, who will be joining us today. Guy, feel free to give an introduction to yourself.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Josh. Yep, my name's Guy. I am a managing partner at Omnicom Media Group here in the UK, and I look after our search business for all our Omnicom OMG UK agencies. So, PhD, OMD, Manning Gottlieb, and Hearts and Science are our big media agency brands in this market.
Wonderful. Good stuff. Hopefully people will be pleased to hear as well. No slides today. Planning on keeping this very conversational. There will be a quick poll at the end if you're interested in hearing a bit more from Athena and how we can help navigate the mad world of AI within search. But yeah, keeping it conversational. There is an option to leave questions. Feel free to add those in throughout. We'll leave a bit of time towards the end, as well as answer any questions that we do get throughout. So wonderful. Guy, starting at the top then, AI seems to be a very hot topic at the moment across the board. So, from your perspective, with search specifically, what does AI within search mean to you?
Yeah, it's a hot button issue at the moment, isn't it? It's quite
Mm,
exciting. I guess the story starts a long time ago, right? AI is not new to search at all. 5+ years, the AI revolution has been coming for things like, auto bidding, broad
mm,
matching, all those sorts of things. They're all sort of AI powered technologies. But really the latest round, probably a year ago, was this buzzword, this buzz area of generative AI, which is something a little bit different. So that journey started with platforms many of us will have heard of, like ChatGPT, which takes the idea of generative AI, i.e., generating content, and applies it to text. So very human sounding written responses, and things like Midjourney that a lot of people have played with as well, which takes that approach to image generation. Creating from prompts, sort of like crazy images. One of my friends, Ollie, on my team, always just creates little Pixar versions of everyone who works for Omnicom using Midjourney and stuff like that, which can be a lot of fun.
nice.
Um, but this is the latest iteration of it, this generative side, which is a little bit different than Google sort of like, or search's normal wheelhouse of things like
Mm,
auto bidding and all that sort of stuff. And Microsoft actually very interestingly won this race quickly to get it into like a search view things. Like Microsoft, 40+% stakeholder in OpenAI who created the Chat GPT model.
mhm.
They were sort of arguably first to market in what does a generative AI powered search experience, what could that look like? And they started integrating Chat GPT into things like Bing, and so you could test that out, play around like that. Google, not to be sort of like left in the lurch, followed up pretty fairly quickly with Bard, their
Mhm.
sort of like version of that generative kind of like AI model, and they really sort of like started announcing how they were planning on rolling that sort of stuff into both their search experience and their actual advertising products at their I/O conference a few months ago. So that's when sort of like things really started kicking off from a search world of things on this generative AI. Um, there were quite a few think pieces when Google did their I/O conference where they announced that they were going to start testing, generative AI powered experiences in search. What do those look like? Well, it looks like, you type in a question, you get sort of like an almost human sounding response, rather than just, those, classic 10 blue links that people are used to
Mm.
seeing. And places like even Forbes and stuff like that release these articles saying like, oh my god, does this spell the end of the sort of like publisher backed internet? Like it's going to be an apocalypse, like the internet's entirely going to change. What's everyone going to do? um like you can probably tell by how I'm sort of like using hyperbole, but here I don't buy into that sort of like full vision of things. I think it
I thought
is
you were
going to
going to say
be,
is it
yeah,
the end
yeah,
of our
it is
jobs
the
for
end.
once?
Everyone, yeah, yeah, everyone run, flee, get out while you still can. No, no, no,
Yeah.
that is not what I think at all. I think it is, the reality is it's going to be a lot more nuanced than that. Like tests across Microsoft and Google, for generative powered search responses, like they're very limited at the moment. They're sort of like 1, 2, 3% worth of traffic in some very particular areas. These businesses are very, very cautious about what it looks like because they really want to, you know not mess with a fundamental search experience where they are not adding tangible value to the end search user. So what my prediction is for search and these kind of experiences is that you can really see where this kind of like chat-based experience adds value for, things like searches. Can you help me plan a weekend trip to Barbados or
Mm,
Barcelona, or wherever you may want to go for the weekend, wherever in the world you are joining us from today? Because those experiences, in doing it in sort of like an old-fashioned way, you'd search, maybe 5 6 different searches to piece together all the information, browse maybe 20 different websites, all this sort of stuff that now Google can collate and sort of like all put in front of you. That's where it's really sort of like saving the user time and it's really tangible. But for like your classic other searches, like corner shops near me, corner stores near me, or
mm,
help me buy red shoes, all this sort of stuff, like the generative idea of a chat human sounding block of text responding to that, it's not really adding anything better than what we currently have in those experiences. And so I think that's what people like Microsoft and Google are going to think about. They're going to think, what proportion of actual searches that people are doing are going to benefit from this sort of technology. I think we're going to get a
mm,
couple of years down the line, and it's going to have expanded from the 2-3% of searches that maybe tested around at the minute. But I don't think it's going to get more than sort of like 10% of total searches and things like that actually benefit from this sort of experience. So I think not apocalyptic, big enough that it's
mhm,
going to make a difference to what we think about and how we think about what search on the internet looks like. And I think that's a good thing. Like I rate there being a little bit of a mix up and things changing. I rate Microsoft getting out there quickly and giving Google something to worry about. More competition there is always really exciting.
mm,
But I think a huge tectonic plate shift in how the internet works. I think this is not, unfortunately for anyone who was really hoping that it would be. I think there's an economic factor to that as well that's not really sort of like talked about or reported on at the moment, which is you know fundamentally it will cost some amount more to serve a search results page that is powered by generative AI than it would to serve just a normal regular vanilla search results page. Um, Now, if you're Google and you're an organization where 85% of your net revenue is coming in through your sort of like search product, then any sort of like factor that is significantly going to shift the economics of how one of those pages works needs to be treated very cautiously, very carefully, very closely.
mm,
If generative AI makes a search results page 15% less profitable for Google than a normal one because of the extra costs they accrue, what's the net impact on advertising? Would that cost sort of like end up advertisers will pay through CPC inflation or something like that? Like
mm,
so I think questions like that are coming up a lot at the moment, and I think Google, particularly, a much bigger portion of Google's business is obviously related to this than Microsoft. You have quite a bit more diversified revenue coming from different areas across things like Office, Windows, Xbox, all that sort of stuff. So Google particularly will be thinking, okay, whoa, do we really want to mess with this function of our business that's working sort of pretty well for us, if we're honest? We want to test out new ways of doing it. We want to do new exciting things for users to get them excited, but do we just want to sort of like jump on a fad and make all of our search results powered by generative AI, um, you know for the sake of potentially cutting our revenues in quite a significant way? I think obviously the answer
mm.
is no there.
Brace yourself for CPC inflation, potentially, potentially.
I
I
hope not. I hope not.
Yeah, we all hope not. I like the brief chronology you gave of Google in particular and their integration of AI into everyday search management, from smart bidding to more dynamic forms of asset creation. I know, having spoken to you before, Guy, you like to sort of segment AI into two pillars.
Yeah.
Generative is one we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today, but there's also the predictive aspect of AI as well. How do you kind of approach those two different almost buckets of AI, and how has maybe the move towards the former to the latter been occurring recently?
Yeah, so I mean, predictive as we sort of set up is the Google, like and Microsoft as well, all these sorts of companies. It's the real bread and butter. It's like
Mm,
from all of the data that we can see in our systems about what someone's intent on a search will be, and all the historical browsing data and device-based data that we've got off of them. What do we think they're likely to want to see next? What do we think they're likely to want to click next? What do we think their next sort of like conversion journey will look like? All of that is based on Google's predictive models that I've said they've been around 5+ years, always getting more and more powerful, and they're great. Value-based bidding is something that we talk about a lot at the moment. Like, how can we apply all of those predictive models, not just to, getting end conversion, sort of like in the platforms for our advertisers, but how can we actually plug in much better live value data from our clients into these ecosystems, so that Google can apply those predictive models to lifetime value and things like that, so that you're not just bidding and paying for an individual conversion. You're bidding for someone who's hopefully going to be spending money with your brands for years down the line. That side of that side of the Google ecosystem, I think broadly everyone's like really bought into, well established, all that sort of stuff. It even applies to things like match types, which are maybe like a little bit more of a hot topic this area. Like Google has
mm,
been very publicly guiding people sort of like towards more broad match as their predictive models have got better. The idea being that if you use something like broad match, which is going to cast the net a lot wider in terms of the actual search terms that you can link to, the AI bidding algorithms that then sit on top of that can have more free reign to find the inventory that's going to cost you less but still has a really high potential to convert, all that sort of stuff. So that end of the predictive stuff, maybe a little bit sort of like more sort of like pros and cons on that side, but broadly all sort of like working really well. Where I draw the line around the generative stuff is what is not about prediction, what is about creating something new. So I've already said that like one way in which that content will be created is end user experiences
mm,
on search pages. So creating new content that looks like written text by a human in those results pages to answer particular questions. But there's a whole bunch of other areas where you can apply that kind of generation style technology. There's areas that we're looking at around like asset creation and things like
mm,
that are a big part of this, like generating new ads ideas, based off of what's worked historically, applying the sorts of technologies like RSA assets and things like that. I think that's going to be something that we talk about a lot sort of in the future, as well as applying it for video image assets, all that sort of stuff.
mm,
And I think that side of it is where I've already sort of like planted my flag in the sand, right, of saying like, look, the
mm,
end user search experience powered by generative AI, I don't think that's going to be sort of like hugely transformative for how search functions. This more advertising angle of it, I think, is potentially much more transformative for people who are working in search and what their day to day sort of like jobs look like. Just logging in and having an AI assistant powered by generative AI within your Google Ads platform or Microsoft Ads platform, that you can just ask questions, say, my CPCs increased last week. What do you think caused that? And it can,
mm,
go through all of the data, show you it's working out, and give you sort of like, a bit of an answer. I think that we're going to get to that sort of reality, fairly soon as well. Which I think is really interesting, and I think raises a lot of questions around like what does the shape of search jobs and stuff like that look like with this more AI assisted optimization style of doing things, either on the asset creation end of things or the AI assistant sort of like in platform end of things. Um,
mm,
and when I think about that, I kind of think about this like T-shaped model that we talk to our teams a lot about, which is, search becoming more automated, more AI powered. Doesn't mean that you're not a deep search specialist anymore. Doesn't mean that just like anyone can, show up on the keywords, and like, do run a really well optimized account for their clients. It's still a deep specialism, and that's the sort of, the vertical line on the T that you'll never not have. But these sort of like virtual assistants or automations, things like that free up some of the manual workload that would go into getting that insight. That sort of going
mm,
away leaves people a lot more freedom, we hope, across the top of that T, to expand their expertise out into other sort of like adjacent areas, so that it's not just about being, deep search and only doing that, but you've got, search down here, and a little bit of knowledge connected to search about, tagging, privacy, business consultancy, KPI management, all these sorts of things that are really important for things to get to grips at, especially as sort of like search moves into a more consultative space. We're hoping to make it less commodified, less, much more about how search can be transformative for overall businesses, rather than just sort of like, someone sat in a dark room managing a whole bunch of keywords. That sort of impact of these technologies, I'm really excited about.
mm,
But the question around all of that, I think, is, particularly on the asset creation side of things, like, are we going to get the guardrails that we need? Like, it's all well and good saying, we can, the AI is going to, create all of these incredible ad variations for our clients and all this sort of stuff. But, how can we be sure that the ad formats are, adhering to, one client's very specific brand guidelines that might be completely different to another client's very specific brand guidelines. Um,
Yeah.
some of you may have heard sort of during Cannes this year. I wasn't there, unfortunately, my invite lost in the post. But Omnicom itself, yeah, I'm livid, absolutely livid. But Omnicom announced a series of really exciting sort of like generative AI partnerships, in Cannes, with everyone basically, with the likes of sort of like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Adobe, all these sorts of big players who run these kind of like generative models. And really the idea about that is about taking these models into individual businesses, so into our business, applying it, so that we're able to apply our own sort of like, brand safety, brand suitability, transparency guidelines on top of some of these models, to be able to add those more effective guardrails for our clients. Like it's completely early days, all that sort of stuff. Obviously, these partnerships and platforms are sort of constantly evolving, but I think if we can through some of these really big partnerships start to put more control, I guess, back into the hands of our kind of professionals so that we can get the best out of the generative AI, but with a little bit more of a, on the ground brand feel and stuff that our agency teams know best because they, live and breathe their clients day in and day out in a way that, an AI can't. I think that will be a really nice mid ground for the sort of market to get to.
Yeah, I think you raise a really interesting point about kind of the brand guidelines and sort of safety, something that I hear a lot from my clients at Athena. And this has been going on ever since, the early days of migrating towards smart bidding,
Yeah,
pushing additional investment through broad matches, is where is that fine line between transparency and control and
yeah,
leveraging the AI and ensuring we're not being left behind from an efficiency and a performance perspective.
yeah.
Where do you kind of draw the lines, and was there any kind of sort of hesitation from your clients when it came to adopting those Google best practices of heavily investing more so in broad match, migrating to smart bidding, and I guess trusting more so the AI and the algorithms around things like responsive search ads and generating those assets? So
Yeah,
yeah, what was there concerns around kind of the loss of transparency and control?
completely. And concern is the right thing, right? Like if
Yeah,
something is fundamentally working, like and a partner like Google is turning around and saying to us, this other way of doing things will work better, you should treat that with skepticism. You should be like, okay, let's do the
yeah,
test. Let's test it out. Let's work. Here's the goal we've set with this test. Whether it's a an auto bidding test or a raw match test or a performance max test. Here's the guidelines. Here's sort of what we need. Um, Google's telling us it should be better. Let's run the test adhering to all of our own best practices and see if the data bears out. And particularly with things like with smart bidding, definitely even with broad match, really a lot of time, vast majority of the time, you know we find that the story is sort of true. Like by and large, if best practices follows, these things sort of do work better because the theory is there. Like, the theory I sort of talked about with the broad match example, like, why would, like, if you have one algorithm that's very good at finding the right people to who are going to buy your stuff fundamentally, and another algorithm that's really good at, casting the net as wide as possible to find inventory that you can buy as cheaply as possible, why would those two things not be able to work together to deliver high quality, sales, for a lower cost than a different match type? You sort of buy into the vision. Um, but I think there is an important distinction between, what is good sort of like performance for our clients and how much do we care about
mm,
that. The answer is, we should care about it loads. But
yeah,
Google and these sorts of big platforms are occasionally like fairly guilty of this tunnel vision around a particular KPI. They're like, my client cares about this CPA, hitting this target CPA. So if it's hitting this target CPA, we know that whatever we were doing was successful. Unfortunately, like, as people in agency land, we're very aware clients by and large aren't that straightforward. Like they will have, sure, a macro target, which is this particular CPA that they want to hit. But at any one time, they'll have five or six other sort of like minor targets that they want to hit at the same time while also hitting that big one. Like, this particular CPA, but this sort of like viewability threshold, or this particular CPA, but like not appearing on against any content that mentions these five different things that they don't think are suitable for their brand. So once you get into like proper in the weeds agency land, any sort of solution that is just about driving that, you know, most pointy performance possible, needs to have some degree of control in it so that our teams can start to try and manage, those other KPIs that sit underneath, like, viewability scores and attention metrics and all these sorts of other things that clients do tend to care about. because ultimately it's us at the end of the day who, gets called up by our clients if they've, you know, seen one of their ads on a really sort of like spammy app, let's say, that they don't think is a particularly sort of like brand suitable environment. Um, and they're like, why are we here? And we'll be like, well, we're here because it's working and it's hitting your performance targets. Often that's not the end of the conversation. They're not like, oh yeah, like if it's hitting performance, that's right. They say, oh, I don't care about the performance to this. This is not a good look for our brand, and we care about that more than the performance if we're
Yeah.
really honest with ourselves. Um, so I think you do need, in campaign, it's all about optimizing to the data performance, but I think we do need, more and more guardrails that sit at like account level and all that sort of stuff that allow us to handle those, brand suitability and control metrics, which, to be fair, Google particularly, hear us on, the last sort of year or so of Performance Max, the amount of control we do have at that kind of like account level to make sure certain things are not showing up against, all that sort of stuff. It fundamentally, they've started adding that stuff in, which is good.
Mm.
Um, but I think you also need to be quite open and honest with clients about what the campaign type is for. Like,
Yeah.
Google's not holding a gun to anyone's head saying, you've got to run Performance Max. Like, Performance Max is a performance product to drive performance. If you're a brand that is, as equally concerned about knowing exactly every single URL where you're showing your ads, um, as you are what performance you're getting, probably it's not the best product for you. But there will be
Mm.
a lot of brands who are willing to, make that sort of calculation about performance versus some of their other goals. Um, so I think it's not going anywhere. Things like PMax, Broadmatch, all this sort of stuff. Big bets for Google. They'll get a lot of investment, and it will just be up to sort of like all of us here, search community kind of people to, to be lobbying Google to push it in the right direction so that it works for, for us and our clients at the same time as, doing their sorts of goals, which they obviously they have goals around. They want to sell more ads across their, more diversified, inventory spaces across, broader
Mm.
YouTube network and broader GDN network and all this sort of stuff. And programs like Performance Max are very good at selling space in those broader spaces. Um, you know, Clearly good for Google to monetize that space more effectively. So you can understand why they want to do it.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I'm definitely reading a degree of transparency and visibility is still required whilst
Yeah.
remaining true and honest about the endpoint and the actual purpose of these products that customers are continuing to adopt. And that's, I suppose, Athena's kind of core core offering
Yeah,
is full
and
full of
we'll flip
transparency.
the script here. I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you, yeah, like what sort of like Athena's view on these sort of like much more like, some people call them black box, PMAX, things like
Mm.
that, performance campaign types. Like, do you see Athena having a sort of like interesting role to play in that kind of space?
100%. Yeah. I mean, why Athena was created in the first place was to give that level of visibility back to clients and back to customers when it seemed that Google were going in the direction of more of a black box solution. And that I think has grown and developed and become even more pertinent over time, given the rise of the number of different products that we've kind of mentioned so far. I think our core offering is really about providing a neutral view of what's happening across the SERP with regards to your own performance. Where are my ads being
Mm,
shown? What variations of creative assets are being demonstrated? What terms am I matching against? How do I
yeah.
benchmark against the competition? So it's very much in Athena's DNA is to provide that neutral view of the SERP, um, and yeah, giving you the ability to actually highlight where you sit in the market comparative to your key competitors as well. And again, things like PMax, I think that aligns itself really nicely with that offering as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think any sort of solution, right, at the end of the day, that backs a broader tech marketplace that sort of like allows other technologies to sort of like jump in and fill that gap so that, you know, Athena is not a small company by any way of looking at it, but compared to Google, like I remember, 5, 6 years ago, there was a lot of worry that like any small tech company started up that had a particular offering, Google would just come in if they liked it and just do their own version of it, and that would be it.
Mm.
But I think some of the broad context here is that like solutions, things like PMax, and even there's a point I'll make about auto bidding after it, but like things like PMax make it even more important to have these sort of like third party technology companies, or just doesn't have to be a technology company, but third party technology solutions that can help you understand a little bit more on what's going on and can demonstrate their value as being additive of what you can get out of the Google Ads platform. So I think probably more of this sort of stuff that requires integration of other technologies or other data sets. It's probably good for a broader sort of like search business community as well, in terms of thinking about new companies that start up around the space. You know established companies like Athena adding different sort of like products and offerings to their bows probably creates more stuff to do, which is great.
100%. Yeah, and we definitely position ourselves as complementary to Google as well, in that we're not here to we are an intelligence platform. At our core, we're not here to take anything away from Google. We're here to simply give visibility into what Google are doing with all of their millions of wonderful different algorithms, whether that is what search terms are matching through to PMAX versus standard campaigns. We can leverage AI to build out a vast network of relevant terms and show you, oh, this is something that's not contained within your search query reports, but we can see an ad live in the wild. We can see that you're appearing against it. Maybe we need to start leveraging those as kind of account wide or PMAX specific negatives,
Yeah,
because the AI it's doing a very good job, but there's that human element as to, I don't necessarily want to match against that. And it's the same with the asset generation as well, as you mentioned earlier, Guy.
yeah,
There is, I think, more so with asset creation and generation than anything, a human eye and a human touch that needs to go into
yeah,
it. Obviously, these models will continue to get better, but brands, big advertisers, they know in general how they want their ads to read, and there is a more subjective, I suppose, tone of voice that goes into the way in which
yeah,
those ads are generated. So that, from a broader sense, with the move to responsive search ads, is definitely been an area of
yeah.
focus. But then also with the rise of PMAX as well, just adding that extra layer of visibility on top of that has been something that's been very very popular recently.
Yeah, I think it's about competition as well, right? Like, as you were talking, like everyone has access to PMAX, and broadly it works exactly the same for everyone. Whether you're an advertiser of who spends 1,000 quid a month, or an advertiser that spends 1 million quid a month, right? Um, and that's one of the really good things about the democratization of search, that you can make that £1,000 work really, really hard for you, compared to an old-fashioned media landscape where the biggest TV dollars sort of like won out in the day, and that was it. So like that was a core principle in Google, is still really, really strong. But the more sort of like everyone just gets access to the same out of the box technology, when you're representing a client, how do they get that competitive edge on what their competitors are doing? The more and more
Mm,
sort of like you get really good performance just by doing sort of like ticking a box and turning on auto bidding, or just by ticking a box and turning on PMAX, like that is great, that is democratic, but it's very, very difficult within that ecosystem, just within that ecosystem, to get that competitive advantage. And that's where solutions that sit outside of that ecosystem, like Athena, at Omnicom, we've got a suite of really exciting
mm,
search tools, Search Connect, that connects all sorts of PPC and SEO data together. Search Protect, which is all about sort of like automatic rule-based competitor monitoring, and our availability engine, which is all about connecting in um, first party sort of like business data, and applying that to your search campaigns. All these sorts of out of platform features become so much more important to give that little bit of competitive advantage, that work in hand with what the automations the platforms are delivering, but don't just rest there. Don't just sort of say like the platform's doing it well on its own. You still can do all of that stuff outside of the platform to get that extra competitive advantage for your clients. I think that's a really exciting space to be in.
mm. Definitely. Definitely. Exciting times indeed. Cool. I see there's a couple of questions in the chat which I'm keen to get to, but I think maybe just to close us out, I think a lot of what we've spoken about so far, laying the groundwork, where are we at? Where do we think we're going? In terms of the here and now, how can search marketers best leverage generative AI in the here and now, in terms of actually improving either the way in which that they operate their day to day, or even more so within Google and Microsoft advertising? What are some of the more tactical things
Yeah.
that people can take away and implement in the here and now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that there's sort of two ways that I think about it. There is, how are the platforms already start to think about utilizing these technologies in platform, themselves. Um, like the automatic asset creation, like the within PMax, like initial testing on the sort of AI assistants. Like as soon as you get the option to test those things, test them. I think, but my broad point there is one I made earlier as well, which is like test, but test cautiously, like work out what's
Mm.
working, work out what's not working. As you said, particularly on that sort of like, asset generation side of things, when it goes wrong, that can be a big headache. So be across it. Don't just sort of like tick the Gen AI box and sort of like let it run, sort of like, and not look at it. That's not the right way to do. Um, but then there's other things like how can you use some of these technologies that exist outside the ecosystems, like getting chat gpt to do your keyword research for you, or getting like chat gpt to write some ad copy for you to sort of like look at and test, and like you can do that without those being inbuilt into the platform experience. Right now, again, I
Mm.
preach caution here, right? Like I think a big factor of how this will work is are these models going to be accessible sort of like within the security environment of companies, because you hear all sorts of like horror stories about like
Mm.
using just public open chat gpt for everyone, and someone from a particular tech company used it to run one of their business reports, and someone else from a competing tech company actually worked out that they could query the public chat gpt to get private competitor data from just what
Interesting.
this person was uploading. So be careful
Yeah.
about that, be careful about
Yeah.
that. But I think once we solve this issue about applying this technology, which a lot of our partnerships that I talked about, hopefully will, and everyone will build these sorts of partnerships, hopefully. More guardrails on where the data is going, like when you ask your individual own company's version of chat gpt to help you with this work, that you're confident that all of the data it's learning stays within your organization, can't be accessed by competitors. I think that side of it will be really interesting as well.
Mm.
There was a really interesting article, I think, from a few days ago. I can't remember who wrote it, but someone fantastic, which was sort of like 10 ideas that you could, how to use chat gpt to help you run better sort of like search campaigns. There was nothing to do with Gen AI in the platforms itself, but using those sorts of platforms um, to get keyword research, ad copy research ideas, account structuring and expansion ideas, all that sort of stuff. Even getting it to write your Excel formulas. I've seen people
Mm.
have a lot of success about. So once I personally feel like we can do that in a privacy sort of like safe way, without sort of like accidentally sharing all sorts of secrets to some sort of like all-knowing external AI overlord, then I think that'll be really exciting.
Absolutely. I think from my side, what I'm really interested to see as well, and I think it's a point you made in the upfront about just changes in user behavior and how they search in
Mm.
order to best leverage the new generative AI. I think from a marketer's perspective, it's all about understanding, okay, does that actually mark a shift in the types of queries that we need to match to? Obviously, the ever
Yeah,
presence of broad match now has made that easier, but I think there's no harm in keeping tabs on what types of queries are rising. Is that theory about potentially longer tailed searches, wanting to get that more personalized response back from the generative AI? Does that mean that we
yeah,
need to at least review our current keyword sets and review our search query reports and ensure that all of our accounts are best set up to kind of match to that? Maybe that is through
yeah,
PMAX. Maybe that is also through traditional broad matching and kind of keyword based activity. But I think from my side, I'm very interested to monitor those types of queries. How does volume on those queries change? And then from
yeah.
a paid search perspective specifically, just making sure that we're all buttoned up from a coverage perspective to make sure that we're set up to capture what we expect to be a slight change in the way in which people are searching.
Yeah, it was interesting, sort of like when voice search was a big sort of fad, like
Mm,
probably like 6, 7 years ago now. I remember everyone was like running around looking at the RSQR reports, expecting to find all sorts of like incredibly hilarious multi-sentence long searches that were
yeah.
showing up there that were clearly sort of voice notes. And I remember at the time we ended up seeing very, very, very little of that. Like maybe it was a voice search specific thing, like people didn't want to feel like they were weirdos sort of like speaking
Mm.
into their phone when they were walking
I
around.
feel that way. I
um
feel that way. I would
yeah,
never do that in
exactly,
public. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. But yeah, I'll be interested to see if maybe this is one of those ones where we do see a sort of like a bit of a shift in the sort of form that searches are taking to kind of like get the most out of these sorts of AIs. It could happen. It could be interesting. I think there's a big factor there as well around like what's going to happen with organic rankings. I think that's the
Mm,
sort of like other side of this coin, which is you know currently there is a very well established long running ranking algorithm that Google has, that like there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of sort of like professionals making their whole career about sort of like um, on-page technical site optimizations that will work as well as possible for these sort of like standard Google ranking algorithms. I know a big question on that at the moment is, is this sort of like, ranking for Gen AI versus ranking for a standard results page? Like, is it going to be different tips and tricks that these people are going to learn to either, make you rank better for sort of
Mm,
like, when an AI is looking for content to pull together for a response, or maybe the response will be that actually people don't want their content to be included because they're worried that content that will be included will not be end up in traffic going to their site. So maybe we'll see the opposite happening, and actually SEO people start to anti-optimize for Gen AI at the same time while optimizing more for sort of like the standard ranking. Like, you've seen a few sort of like, I would call them horror stories, like over the last couple of
mm,
weeks, of things like, when the Gen AI is in charge of that kind of ranking, it can actually, through robots.txt, which is the methodology that
mm,
Google currently has for pulling all their organic ranks together and actually looking at all the data on the pages. But the AI could pull, because of that robot.txt file, content that was behind paywalls, basically, that the AI could see, but that, in
right.
order for a user to be able to see, they'd either have to sign up or pay for a service, or do whatever, which is obviously a big problem for publishers. They
Mm,
can't have people be able to sort of like circumvent their paywalls by doing this sort of stuff. So I know, to be fair, I think Google and Microsoft both reacted really quickly to do it, and we're like, we're looking into this, trying to shut it down, making sure that doesn't happen anymore. But it does raise sort of questions like,
mm,
will they just apply a whole bunch of new stuff to the standard kind of way, everything ranks, and Google scrapes data from people's websites to understand ranking? Clearly that's how it's worked at the moment, just the AI piggybacking off of it a little bit. But that's caused all these issues. Will they sort of like, will it be a leaky ship where they just keep putting plasters on the same thing, or will they actually take a step back
mm.
and say, actually maybe for this new world, a slightly different way of doing this is a better way than sort of like the legacy that's been going on? I don't know. I think that could be a really interesting space over the next few years.
Absolutely. So if there's any publishers on the call, make sure all your processes are buttoned up. Otherwise, people won't be
Hmm.
getting all that content for free. Awesome, good stuff. I think a good transition over to some of the questions that we've got in the chat then, guys. So one from Katie here, directed to you, Guy, looks firmly in the agency realm. So I'll let you tackle this one. But yeah, to Guy, how can folks from the agency side address client concerns about users slowly transitioning to ChatGPT for search as they evolve to be more user friendly?
Yeah, I think it's a good point of view. I think that, ChatGPT ultimately is not a search company. Like that, there's, you can access
Mm,
it, you can pay your monthly subscription to be able to sort of use it. Or you can use the sort of like Microsoft sort of Bing plugin, or like the plugin for the Bard sort of stuff for search. I think the likes of Microsoft and Google, as I was saying up front, toying around with, adding some of this technology into the live search experience, I think is is all about that. Is all about not losing sort of like actual site traffic to people who are using these sorts of services, and people start using sort of like, Chat GPT instead of, Microsoft,
mm,
instead of Google. Um, but I think a lot of what people want when they're searching is knowledge about stuff that's happening now. And when you're using
mm,
sort of like vanilla chat GPT, separate from all of this sort of like search stuff that we've been talking about, there are still some really big sort of like barriers in terms of like the like how fresh the data it has access to and
mm,
all that sort of stuff is. Like, I don't like the thing I more Google, I'm a bit of a, film nerd. So the thing that I Google more than anything is just sort of like what is, showing at my local cinema sort of like, this week, so I can work out which night I want to go and see a film. Like ChatGPT is not set up to be able to deal with any of that sort of search and stuff like that. Um, so I think, talking to clients, it's about saying, you know, it's really unlikely that you're going to lose core search database, people, particularly like the performance end of search, people searching for deals
mm,
on shoes and holidays, all that sort of stuff, just changes so quickly that, vanilla separate interface chat GPT just isn't set up to handle it. You're not losing those sort of performance searches to chat GPT. What you are doing is you're getting these sorts of companies like Microsoft and Google explore in a fairly sort of like limited way the technology and moving that into search. I think that's a direction that things will move in. But I think the
mm.
idea of losing traffic, like particularly core high performing traffic, to a completely separate interface with no advertising ecosystem, anything currently set up in it, I think clients, yeah, don't need to be worried about that.
Mm. And as Google and Microsoft begin to integrate these models better into the SERP, it's surely going to give the users a better experience anyway, which is going to naturally bring more users to search more to Google. That's entirely a theory, but I think we
Yeah,
might be in this weird position at the moment where things like ChatGPT have obviously exploded. There's a lot of interest around it, but again, as people start to realize that that technology has been scaled to platforms they're more familiar with, like Google, I think they'll naturally find themselves coming back to that,
yeah,
and being able to obviously benefit from the familiarity of Google, but then also leverage all of the new great content and the way in which it's being displayed through the generative AI models.
yeah, exactly.
Awesome, cool. Couple more questions coming in here. So, would we see the likes of Google throttling their application of Gen AI with industries that are subject to higher compliance, I FinServ and Pharma, when it comes to how their content is displayed on the SERP?
Yeah, we talked to Google about this a lot from the
Mm,
advertising side of things, obviously more than the display of SERP side of things, because we work with a whole bunch of clients that have a lot more guidelines, legal requirements that have to be included in all of their ad copy, which obviously creates a complete heart attack for for clients when they're thinking about anything sort of like auto-generated advertising, all that sort of stuff. So I definitely think we've seen a lot already on the advertising side of Google sort of actually saying like, yeah, we understand you. We want to be able to give you more ability to control certain things. Like I remember arguments that we've had with Google over the years about pinning of headlines and stuff like that in RSAs, and they were thinking about getting rid of that at some point. We're like, no, this is like really a requirement for so many industries that need to know that a particular message is in all of their ads for sort of like legal requirements. So that side of things, I think Google is always or not always, but Google has shown a track record of understanding those sorts of things and designing products with those sorts of clients in mind, as well as the more sorts of clients that can be open to anything. Um,
mm,
so I think, yeah, I think it's always going to be more of an opt-in. I think that's what when I talk to Google about it, and like I say like, oh, PMAT should work like this, work like this, work like this, they always come back and they say like, it's opt-in. Don't use it if your clients don't
yeah.
want to use it. Like, we'll meet in the middle on certain things if we think it will make a better product, but all of these ultimate things will be opt-in for clients. And if they exist in a sort of compliance environment where opting in is really really problematic, then probably our advice as an agency partner would be, yeah, this is not right for you. Don't opt in.
Mm, yeah. I think to that question about the higher compliance industries as well, it's obviously in Google's best interest to roll out these technologies to as broad a client base as physically possible. So, to your point, Guy, I know there's huge levels of restrictions on how ads are displayed within the pharma space. That was something that I
Yeah,
wasn't used to. Moved over to the US with Athena, started working with some pharma companies. Massive learning
yeah,
experience for me, but it wouldn't surprise me that as these technologies are integrated more holistically with or anyway, there's a desire to integrate them more holistically, that Google will make amendments and changes to help cater to those more heavily regulated industries. And then outside of that, to allow marketers who are working within those industries to sleep better at night. It's all back to that kind of visibility piece. How can we work
yeah,
with other technologies, the ones at Omnicom, potentially Athena, just to make sure that we've got that kind of safety net in play to ensure that all of those checks and balances that Google put in place are leading to an experience that is in line with industry standards and regulations as well.
yeah, completely.
Awesome. I see there's two additional questions that we've got, and I don't necessarily want to rush through them. However, I'm more than happy to follow up with them over email. I think it was Dan and who was it? Dennis and Lauren, I believe. Apologies, we didn't get to your questions, but yeah, we will 100% follow up with those over email. I'm just copying your emails now. I'll be more than happy to help out with that. Awesome, Guy. Any final thoughts? Anything else to say, or should we wrap everything up there?
Yeah, I mean, final thoughts to leave you with. AI, not the apocalypse. I've not seen any evidence of sort of like, Terminator style shenanigans going on yet. So hopefully sleep easy about that. And just because something is sort of like, automatically generated within this AI environment does not mean it has to be a complete black box. Like, find the ways, find the technologies that help you get the data out of it and keep that optimization going. If you need to augment data inside these, media platforms to do that, like it's not going to give you just that data on its own. That's fine. Find the ways to augment it, work with technologies that augment it so that you can keep driving for that competitive advantage.
Wonderful. Great way to end it. There's a quick poll that's just been thrown up as well, and I would be massively appreciate if anyone could go ahead and fill that out if you would like. So we'll let that run for a little bit. And outside of that, just want to thank everyone for attending today, wherever you were in the world, whether it be afternoon, morning. I know there was some interest from Australia, who I don't think did hop on, given that it'll be the middle of the night. But thank you, everyone, for taking the time. Hopefully, you've taken some interesting bits and pieces away from today. And yeah, wishing you a very enjoyable rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye.